Hello everyone. So part of the reason, part of the purpose of my of this channel is for me to help the transgender community. This is on one hand the best time in the history of everything for trans people, and at the other, in another sense, kind of the worst time. It's a very interesting dichotomy, and unfortunately I think we've all been cursed with living in interesting times. But to the end of helping the trans community, and perhaps people within the entirety of the LGBTQ plus community, and perhaps to help cisgender people, I wanted to talk about my coming out and how that went. So yeah, let's get into it. So I'm not young. I'm pushing 40. I hesitate to admit that, but it's true. But I mention it only for context, historical context. Okay, so I came out when I was about 19. That was about 20 years ago, 21 years ago. It was a very different time then. The word transgender was not in wide usage. That didn't come around until a few years after I had come out to my family. I will tell my story from the beginning. So it all started really when I was about 5 or 6. I'm a massive Star Trek fan. I don't know if you've noticed. And I was at my dad's, and this was back in the mid-80s, like 85, 86, and I was watching an episode of Star Trek, and it was the episode Cat's Paw. And in the episode, there are these two aliens, and one presents as male, human male, and one presents as human female. And when I saw the first version, the first form that the female took was not interesting to me. But then she transformed herself into someone different, and I found the appearance of her to be appealing, but not in a, oh, I want to be with her, you know, I want to, you know, be intimate with her. It was, I want to be her. I was like, oh my God, she looks amazing. And she had this hair and her outfit. I wanted her dress and everything. And that was the moment when I realized that, you know, oh, okay, you know, this is a part of me too. And popular culture, my parents, society taught me through shaming, you know, where they have songs, or they have movies or episodes of TV shows where they make fun of transgender people. Yeah, that all has a very detrimental effect to transgender people. When we're younger, it can make us hate ourselves, and that's not okay. It's not okay to make fun of a trans person. Because why are you making fun of a trans person? Because they're trans. For no other reason. I mean, you shouldn't be making fun of people, period. You know, if you're going to fucking make fun of somebody, make fun of somebody like Donald Trump. You know, not some poor person who's just trying to get by without getting murdered by some asshole who thinks it's funny to laugh at trans people. But anyway, I digress somewhat. So, even at that young age, as much as I wanted to um, be female in appearance and in you know every other form, society, even at 5 or 6, was you know, society told me that's not okay. But society at the same time told me that fat people aren't okay, wearing glasses isn't okay, you know, being this, being that. No matter what I did, there was going to be some asshole who said that I wasn't okay. And eventually I realized that that's just a bullshit construct. It's something that other people apply to you. And just because someone else views you as being wrong doesn't make you wrong. There are certain things within our society that we can say definitively are not okay. Rape, murder, child molestation, you know, these things, they're extremely harmful to other people, and they're acts committed to other people. Being transgender doesn't hurt anybody. And yeah, I'll get into that later. So I felt that I should hide it. At the same time, I began fantasizing, having sexual fantasies, and those fantasies, they made me think that perhaps I was gay. And I thought, well, maybe, you know, I see drag queens, and you have a lot of drag queens who are gay, you know, maybe I'm just gay, you know. But no, it was much deeper than that and much different than that. That's not saying that being gay is shallow or anything, it's just there was more to it, you know. So I realized that I was really different, but I knew my parents well enough to, at least at that time, to avoid telling them about it as much as I wanted to. Again, this was back in the 80s, you know, and things were still, it was kind of still the dark ages, you know, sociologically at that point. Being gay was just beginning to be considered acceptable. I like the TV show The Golden Girls, well, for the most part. And what's funny is that they had episodes where they actually supported the gay community, gay men and lesbians. But one of the occasionally talked about but never seen characters was Sophia's son, Phil, who was, although they didn't use the terminology, transgender. And Phil was always the butt of the joke, as if being transgender, dressing female, was somehow a choice, whereas being gay wasn't a choice. These are the kinds of idiotic double standards that we've been trying to break down and having to deal with. You know, it's always people like me that have to deal with it. The bigots don't have to deal with it. They may hate it, and it fucks up their brain, but that's it. They don't have to deal with all of the shaming and bullshit, you know. So, uh, I hid, and I hid, and I hid. Um, I didn't have access when I was younger. I didn't have access to female clothes. Um, and so it was all through fantasies. And then I got to about 13, 14. My family had moved to a different house, and my grandmother was storing one of our relatives' clothes there, and her clothes happened to fit me. Um, and then it kind of all came together. Um, I realized that it was much, much deeper. There was so much more there. But I was still stuck with some of these masculine features. And I never looked particularly masculine, but lucky for me. But I still had more masculinity than I really ever wanted. I was lucky in that the clothes were stored in my room, so I had ready access to them with, you know, or I didn't have to um, try to sneak them around or anything. Um, and I had opportunities to be with women in school, you know, and I was kind of like, okay, but I don't. I never felt a connection to women in that way. Um, Women seem to be more sensitive and more caring than men, and I was drawn to that. But I didn't want to be involved with them um, in a way that was anything more than just, you know, good friends. And but it was a really dark time for me, having to hide that to such an extent, being so afraid of somebody finding out. The fear just drove me nuts, as it does, I'm sure, all of you whom are watching this and know what I'm talking about. Never being able to express yourself, to be repressed and to be oppressed. If our society was well adjusted, none of us would have any of these mental problems, because once we realized who we were, we'd be able to just come out and say, oh, okay, well, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to present and dress and everything else. Unfortunately, we have a very maladjusted society, and I would say that that is true of all human society. Although some places are a little more progressive than others, but very few places. So, yeah, in school, repressed, very miserable. Um, but I knew, because of certain interactions that I'd had with other people, and having seen, there was back in the 90s, some of the goth guys um, would wear skirts. These guys would either get threatened to be beaten up, or they would get beaten up. And so that kind of stuck in my head, and I said, okay. I wasn't a particularly popular person in school. And so I was like, okay, Everybody here fucking hates me anyway. The less shit I get from these assholes, the better. So, but I said, once I get out of high school, because I knew just kind of intrinsically, I had a sense of it that the world outside of school was different. It just had to be, you know. And it is. It's different. You can still run into difficulties, but you know, there's much more diversity in the types of people and ages and things like that that you experience outside of school rather than inside school. And so I said, okay, once I get out of school, I'm going to explore this. Well, it was about 1998 or so, and I saw, and another aspect of this was, despite the fact that I knew that there were other people who would dress feminine back in the day, the common term was cross-dresser. Transsexual, transvestite, these terms are all they're not okay today. Transgender is the term to use. I've found trans chasers who still use transsexual and transvestite. It's like, dude, come on, get your head out of your ass. You know, if you're going to be chasing us, then you better get the terminology right. I can't imagine these guys getting lots of dates. Anyway, so I thought I was the only one, which was funny because I knew there were other people, but I still felt so isolated. I never knew anyone who was like me, or so I thought. I'll get to that later. So it's about 1998 roughly, and oh god, yeah, I have to get to that. My appearance, I have to get to that too, but I'll get to it later. So 1998, I see this show, and it's about what at the time they called cross-dressers. I can't remember the name of it. It was some kind of special or something. It was HBO or some kind of thing. And I think it was like an hour long. And basically, it was people like me being interviewed. It was like a documentary. And I went, oh my god, I'm not the only one. Again, I knew that, but I never knew anybody. Any real people. All the people whom I'd seen who were like me, I'd seen on TV, and they were always the butt of the joke. They were always disrespected. So, watching that show changed my life. I would have come around eventually anyway. I would have transitioned anyway. But I think that kind of sped it up for me psychologically. Because I realized that I was not some kind of aberration. You know, I wasn't the butt of the joke. I was, as I realized in that moment, a member of a community. And that there were others like me, and therefore there was the possibility of support and encouragement. Because up till that point, all I'd ever gotten in any aspect of my life was discouragement. I had never had anybody encourage me. And so seeing that made me realize that what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I want, who I want to be is not a mental condition. It's not mental illness. It's a part of humanity. And watching that show also kind of signaled to me that times were changing. people were starting to take us seriously, to acknowledge us as more than just a joke. So I said, at that moment, I said, okay, once I get out of high school, I'm going to come out to my parents and my family, and then hopefully the world. So, get out of school, and at this point I had never dressed fully female. I never presented fully female to anybody. So I came up with this really stupid ruse where I pretended that someone whom I knew from school had, I'd lost a bet or something, or they'd put me up to dressing female. And so under this guise, I got my grandmother to take me to like thrift stores and to buy some clothes that I liked, and to buy me a wig, because my hair didn't look at all how I wanted it to look. So, and I couldn't have it cut into the style that I wanted, because the style, it was too feminine, at least at the time. I see more and more young people with similar styles to what I like, but yeah, anyway. That's another interesting thing about fashion, that fashion has kind of become, you know, I see women who have more traditionally male haircuts. I see males with the same haircut. You know, I see younger people with haircuts that I've seen lesbians with, you know, or other people with. You know, it's great that we're finally kind of blurring that line, you know, between genders, just societally, you know, in our general appearance. So finally I had some clothes that I liked, and I had a wig, and I had all that stuff. And I went out, and I didn't go anywhere. I don't know if I had a car at that point. I don't think I did, since my grandma had to take me out. And so I just kind of walked around, and under the cover of darkness, I was still frightened, scared to death of even leaving the house. I was scared of getting caught dressed like that. And then on top of that, I was scared of leaving the house, like just going outside in the middle of the night, you know, at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was afraid. Almost like there was some kind of force field or barrier preventing me from leaving. But I did. It didn't feel entirely right at first, because of how awkward I was, how awkward the clothes I had were. They didn't exactly fit me, but it basically felt right. Kind of everything aligned at that point. All the feelings I'd had, how I was more attracted to males than females, it all kind of, it fit, you know. So that feeling right for once, made me realize that that's who I was. That's who I wanted to be. That's how I wanted to look. I was still that person. I just needed the outside to match the inside. And so it was Halloween, was the thing. And I had done my makeup. I had certain influences which I wanted to look a certain way at that time. I ended up looking like a whore. I mean, lots and lots of makeup, but that's what I was going for. So, and another thing that I'd done previously was I'd used some of my grandmother's makeup. So recreating looks from movies and stuff like that. One day she was like, I thought I had more makeup than this. I was like, oh, I should makeup. And that was the times. That's what we had to do. We had to hide. I'll try to remember to bookend this story with something that I'd seen a few years ago. So I look like a whore, and I decided, you know what? Now's the right time. And my older brother seemed mildly more reasonable than my parents, and because we were siblings, there was a disconnect. He wasn't one of my parents, and he had had a lot of the same problems with my mother. At the very least, we had the same mother that I had had, so we understood each other on that level. So I said, I'll tell him first. So I did. I was like, I was almost wincing, waiting, for the shit to start to fly. And he said, oh, I do that too. Dress female. And I went, you do? And he said, yeah. And that was a good moment to get me into the situation, into telling everybody else, to have that positive reaction and that connection in a way. We've since lost that connection because my brother is extremely jealous of me because of how far I've gone now. He doesn't think that he can do it, even though he could if he tried, but he won't. So we do not have a good relationship, unfortunately. But at that time, we had an okay relationship, for the most part. So I was like, okay, well that was easy. Now I'll go tell Mom. Because I left my dad, to the very end. Because I really didn't know how he would react. So I tell my mom. And she said, oh, okay. But she said that she didn't, it came out of left field. She had told me about, once I came out to her, she told me about my brother. And she said, I always knew about him. I never knew about you. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess I hit it better. And she's like, well, that's okay. She's fine with it. She has since, like my brother, not become fine with it. She still calls me by my dead name, and she misgenders me all the time. So I've cut her out of my life completely. Unfortunately, that's kind of the, I skipped right to the end as far as that's concerned. I probably shouldn't have, but, whatever. So, my mom wanted to take pictures. I'm like, I don't want to take pictures. Because I've always felt ugly. My whole life I've felt ugly. It's only within the last few years that I've actually felt attractive. And been, I think, attractive to other people. So, yay that. That can come with its own problems. But I let her take pictures. I was like, and I looked like a whore. It's like, oh, why now? But yeah, whatever. Later on I went and she would take pictures and she would keep All of her pictures. She would keep the negatives and everything else. So I went later and destroyed the pictures and the negatives. I didn't want I looked terrible in those pictures. I didn't want that to be people's impression of me. I didn't want them to laugh at me, and then, kind of do oh, you look so much better now. It's like, fuck you, fuck off. So, for better or for worse, it was probably a bad idea on my part, but I decided to tell my dad while I was dressed up like a girl. So he comes to pick me up, and I walk outside. I'm wearing a red velvet dress that's above the knees, black stockings, black, I don't know, flats. I was wearing my grandmother's fake fur coat with leopard print on the cuffs. That somehow that got integrated into everything, because now I wear leopard print all the time. I just love the way it looks. I think it goes well with the hair and everything else. So I said, "Oh, hi, Dad." And my dad is he's kind of stone-faced. He didn't really react. I said something like, "Oh, now you've got a daughter, and yeah." So I went and I rode home with him like that. Yeah. We talked about it briefly. He didn't really react too much. It wasn't, you know, he wasn't overly negative about it. I was like, okay. So, after all, this was the guy who once told me when I was a little kid, and I'll tell this story at some point, but he told me that after he insulted some guy because that guy looked different, he was a punk guy with a big mohawk, and my dad kind of said insulting things about him, not to him, but about him. I might as well tell the story now. I kind of reflected what my dad said. I said kind of the same thing. And my dad, I think at that moment, realized that he was, raising a child. And so he said, well, we should judge people not upon how they look, but upon, you know, their character, who they are, how they treat us, that kind of thing. And it always stuck with me, because again, I still felt different. We're not actually different. We're a part of humanity, So yeah. But when we went home, Dad was in his room. I was on the couch watching TV, still dressed up, makeup and all. And my dad comes in the living room and says, "Are you going to take that stuff off?" In a really, I don't like you looking like that kind of way. And I was like, well, And I did end up taking it off not too long after that. 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that. Just to be a little defiant. I'm not going to do it right now when you told me to do it. I'm going to do it when I'm damn well good and ready. Except I didn't. I did it much sooner than I was ready. But that's how that went. Well, later, my dad well, I'll tell this part. Later on, a few years later, I went into my dad's room one day, and he was on the computer, and I saw him looking at and engaging with trans women. And then there was a time not too long after that where his girlfriend was yelling at him for looking at these other women, and she said, Do you really want women like that? Now she could have been suggesting that they were, um, that they were sluts or whatever, or what I think is more likely is that, women like that, transgender women. And then a few years after that, um, he and I talked a little bit more about it, and I explained it more for him so he could understand it from the perspective of an actual trans person. But I don't know what those other women told him, but I wanted to tell him my perspective, so I did, and he accepted it for a while. So, as with my mother and my brother, my dad and I had a falling out too. I told Dad at a certain point. My dad seemed okay with it when I was still presenting male, because I was in the closet for much longer after that. I was in the closet until I was 35. So just a few years ago, literally. Um, I told my dad that I told him the name that I preferred, and I began presenting female, and I said, okay, call me this from now on, and um, he tried. He did pretty good, actually. I could tell that he was actually trying, unlike my mother. She wouldn't try at all. She would just use the wrong pronouns, and she didn't care. She never gave a shit about me. So that's why it was fine for her to completely disrespect me that way. I guess she thought that I'd stick around forever. It's funny, she's getting old now, her husband's gonna die, and she's gonna come looking to me for help. And it's like, nope, you're on your own, bitch. Um, I'm not gonna help somebody who, you know, fucked me over and threw me to the wolves and disrespected me. Fuck that. Um, so I saw my dad and I told him, call me by my, preferred name. And later on, we kind of lost touch for a while. Then I would see him when I was out and about, and I would stop and talk with him. And he, I think it became too real for him. When I was presenting male and telling him about it, it was somewhat abstract. But when I began presenting female, it became a reality to him, I think. And that's what kind of burned up his brain or whatever. Um, he told me, oh, I don't want to see you again and whatnot. He tried to pretend it wasn't because I'm trans. But having figured out that he was attracted to trans women, and my being a trans woman, I can only wonder if that perhaps factored into it for him, if that made him feel extra uncomfortable. But what was interesting is when he would hug me, he would hug me and hold me for a really long time. My dad was always more emotional and more connected emotionally than my mother. My mother used children as props. My dad actually did have some love and concern, but apparently not enough to stick around. So I've been really going at it on my own for the past few years, and it's been hard. I've met other trans people, but they've been just as flaky and fucked up as my parents. So I've never really been able to connect with another trans person, which again isolates me. So, yeah, that's been tough. But, yeah, I don't want any of you to think that, I mean, telling this story now, I think, I don't want to drive anybody away. I don't want to, that's not, no, I don't necessarily mean drive away. I don't want to cause anyone to stay in the closet. When I was in the closet, I was in hell. My every thought was concentrated, focused upon looking female, wanting to look female, wanting to be with men, wanting to express myself, and it took over my brain and my every thought. Once I transitioned, and I started looking good, looking how I wanted, all of that went away. It's like I could finally exhale, you know? I had been holding my breath for 35 years. So, if you're holding your breath, I understand that there are parts of the United States and the world that are far more dangerous than where I live. And so I understand if you would take those concerns I don't want you to use the possibility of violence against you to hold yourself back. That's what I did, and I missed out on a lot of good years. You don't want to live in fear. You don't want to suffocate yourself. You don't want to lose your life. You don't want it to... And what I mean by that is, I was so afraid when I was in the closet that I couldn't leave the house. That I waited, and I waited so long. Don't make the same mistakes that I did. Don't wait that long. Because you're only hurting yourself. There's never been a better time to come out and live out. Yes, there are dangers. But when I lived out, I would get comments initially because I wasn't on HRT. If you want to get on HRT, go to Planned Parenthood. They'll set you up. They helped me. And eventually you can get a primary care provider and you can get your meds through them. So it's not impossible. There are avenues. It's much easier now than it was 20 years ago when I came out initially. Understand that the possibility of violence is just a possibility. It's not a certainty. Unfortunately, we don't know the outcome of anything that we do or anything that anyone else does. But you cannot let the potential for harm prevent you from doing something that will enlighten you, it will inspire you, it will make you who you are. The only regret, the biggest regret I have in my life is that I never tried when it came to certain things. Those are oftentimes our biggest regrets, is when we don't take that chance. Yes, we can fail, but we can learn from that. It can help us to understand life, other people, ourselves. But if you stay in the closet, you eliminate any possibility of reaching your full potential. Because once you do it, you can get all that out of the way and you can focus on other things. So a few years ago, it was 2016, right at the beginning of 2016, I started living out. Got my hair done, started wearing more feminine clothes. I still got misgendered a lot. I wasn't wearing makeup at that point. And over the past few years, I've integrated more things into my routine, into my appearance. I've refined it. I've gotten it to where I really like it. There'll be a lot of time where you're just finding your footing. If you feel that other people have some expectation, that you have to look a certain way, that you have to present a certain way, that you have to be female or male, disregard that. Because those other people, they don't matter. Yes, they can do things to you, but they're going to do things to you if you're trans anyway. If their intention is to do things. Don't feel like you have to commit or be or pursue a gender if you don't really want to. This is something that I did, and it took me a long time to do this. I would go out, and whenever I went out, I would look at women, other women, and I would note which ones are wearing makeup, how many of them are wearing makeup, what is their general style, things like that. And that helped me. That helped me to go easier on myself, to not hate myself so much for not being perfect. When you get on HRT, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen gradually. But eventually it will happen. You'll see changes. It took me, 6 months, 7 months to really start to see changes in my, at the very least in my face. You know, unfortunately it takes time for us to bloom, so to speak. So, yeah. It is the best thing I've ever done. Coming out and living out. Best thing I've ever done. Because I've been able to explore so much more of myself. And I've been able to explore other people. I've been able to explore life and see it from a different point of view, a different perspective. I cannot tell you how incredibly amazing and fascinating it is to spend your whole life up to a certain point being one gender, appearing to be one gender to others, and then being viewed by others as a completely different gender. You get to see the world from two very different perspectives, because women are treated very differently than men. The expectations are different. For better or for worse, I think a lot of these expectations are bullshit. But there is a difference, and hopefully we can chip away at that bullshit too. And there are certain challenges. You know, you're going to face things that you've never faced before. But look at it not as a challenge, but as an adventure. The world is seeing you as a completely different person. And there can be something really fascinating about that. Also understand that the things you're thinking, the things you're feeling, are okay. It's natural. And you're thinking these things and feeling these things for a reason. That's your body, that's your mind, that's you trying to tell you who you are. It was hard for me. It took a long time. Learn from my mistakes. Explore yourself. I don't do it often, but I occasionally talk with other people, other trans people, on forums and whatnot, and it has been a great joy, one of the great joys of my life, to impart my experience to others, to encourage them. And I think that's a part of who I was supposed to be too. So here I am, talking with you. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. And you know, don't be afraid to fail, because we can learn from failure. You're going to feel ugly. You're going to feel like you aren't succeeding. Just understand that it takes time, and it takes a degree of effort. And like I say, be observant. Look at other people. Look at men. Look at women. Look at the gender to which you identify, if you identify to a gender, and see what they look like. They don't look perfect. Not every guy is some massive monster Hulk. In fact, I don't find that attractive at all. I like guys who are smaller in stature. I'm not short. Personally, I like guys that are a little taller, but I like guys that are average, have regular bodies, so don't feel like you have to be something else to get, a life partner. You don't have to have giant boobs. You don't have to have a perfect face, you know? I don't know. I ask myself sometimes if it's privilege that allows me to say that. I I hope not. I try not to let that factor in if it is a factor. But, I mean, kind of the definition of privilege is not realizing that you're privileged. So, yeah. But I didn't always look like this. So, it took time. Yeah. But above all, just be you. You know? So, that's my advice. A few years ago, I still looked pretty awkward, but I had begun my transition, and I was at a Denny's. I was just leaving, and a dad came in with his 3 kids, and one of them had very short hair, and she was wearing makeup, wearing clothes, and little heels and things like that. She was trans, and her dad, from what I could tell, had no problem with it, treated her just as he did his other children. Again, just from the short period that I observed, but that made me realize that the world really is changing. It's, in that sense, it's getting better. It's becoming more normalized. And that's really one of the big goals, isn't it? so that someday a child can come out and say, this is who I am. And they will be acknowledged. They will be respected. Think back to when you were a kid. You had a sense of yourself. You knew who you were, who you wanted to be in many respects. Your thoughts were just as valid. The reason that you didn't like your parents sometimes was because they were limiting your freedom. It was you growing and beginning to assert yourself. There's always going to be assholes, but I think the more we push, the harder we fight, the more of us come out. And the more of us who take on bigotry, the less bigotry there'll be. Those bigots will recede. They'll shut their stupid fucking mouths for once in their pathetic lives. Because enough people will have realized, it would have become just a normal aspect of humanity that the majority of people are going to be like, hey, shut the fuck up, asshole. When somebody gets out of line and somebody acts like a dick. So, but we're getting to that point, but we still have a ways to go. It's also important, if you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community, to pay attention to politics and to understand that the Republican Party is not your friend. They're not on your fucking side. They're not supporting you, so don't support them. Why anyone would support their oppressor is beyond me. It's just idiotic. But I digress. Yeah, eventually we're going to get to a point where people don't think twice about a trans person. I mean, I personally I'm kind of getting there already. I noticed it in my own life. When I was first out and about, and when I first began my transition, again, I got misgendered a lot, because of my voice, and I didn't wear makeup, and I didn't, not all of my clothes were as feminine. And, but now, when I talk on the phone, I get misgendered still. But, somebody hears me on the phone, and there's still a little pause, but, they get past it, and then they see me in real life, and they totally get it. Like, oh, okay, now I unfortunately, I think you kind of have to meet or exceed their expectations, to get them to just treat you with basic human decency and respect, which is bullshit. Yeah. Dating. Oh God. Dating is a whole other can of worms. I wouldn't suggest wasting any time with chasers. They're only after you for one thing, and that's sex. And that's not a healthy foundation upon which to build a relationship. And that's ultimately what you want. I'm sure there are people out there who are just fine with straight up sex, and as long as you do it safely and responsibly, hey, go for it. But if your goal is a relationship with another human being, a romantic relationship, an intimacy that goes beyond sex, then you want to look elsewhere. You don't want to deal with chasers. That's 21 years of experience talking. So before I had mentioned my appearance. So, when I was a teenager, my mom bought me this book. It was a big book. This was back in the mid-90s. And the book, I think, was called The 20th Century. Something like that. And I was initially I was kind of bored by this. I was like, what am I? I was a teenager. I didn't give a shit about history. I didn't give a shit about politics. I didn't give a shit about anything. All I cared about was Star Trek model kits, and well, that's pretty much it. Um, but one day I was looking through it, and I came upon this section of the book. It kind of talked about briefly each decade of the 20th century up until the time at which the book was published, mid-90s. So I'm looking through the book one day, and I come upon the 1920s, the section of the book that's 1920s. And it mentions flappers. And I'm like, what the hell is a flapper? I don't know. What is that? Some kind of bird? Some kind of dance or something? Where, people do this or something? And then I turn to this page, and I'm reading, and I'm like, okay, this is young women in the 1920s, and they've become liberated from the the clutches of the Victorian era, and they were coming into their own. Women got the right to vote in 1920. If you can believe it took that long. And women suffragettes, actually, and this ties into the modern LGBTQ plus movement. Suffragettes, for decades of the 19th century, women fought real hard to get the right to vote and to determine their own fate, to not be saddled with men, by society. It took decades. Decades. So, but it did happen. So, we are driving towards something positive, just because we haven't completely reached it yet doesn't mean that, don't get discouraged. That's basically what I'm saying. Anyway, and I'm going through the book. I turn a page, and I see this line of women, and they were like, I think they worked in like they did a burlesque show or something, I don't know. But they all had bobbed hair, black bobbed hair. They all did. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. But I looked at them and how they looked, and their kind of, roundish faces, and their hair, and their makeup, and how they were dressed. And I had no direction before. I had never seen any women whom whose appearance really made an impression upon me beyond that episode of Star Trek that I mentioned. And when I saw those flappers, I went, oh my God, that's it. That's how I want to look. It was like that scene in the Blues Brothers where Jake and Elwood are they're in the church, and Jake's like, oh yeah, fuck this, fuck you, and suddenly the light comes through, it comes through the clouds, and then it comes through the window, and it shines right on Jake, and he's like glowing, and he gets it, the band. That's what it was for me. Flapper. I said, that's me. In being, in attitude, and in everything. And it took me a few years to get here, but yeah, now I finally have basically the look. So, when I got that wig, it was a Halloween costume wig. It was terrible, but I loved it. It was a flapper wig, and it looked basically like this. Yeah. So, and I mean, you're not necessarily going to have that, you know. Some of us, we just, that kind of thing just happens. But, yeah, don't feel bad if you don't have that, you know, and don't necessarily go looking for anything, you know. Let it come naturally. Anyway, so I sincerely hope that this has helped you. Whomever you are, whatever situation you're in. I mean, I made the video for trans people, you know, to support all of you and to lift you up and empower you and perhaps, I don't know, maybe in some meager way inspire you by telling my own story. But I hope that I've reached some cisgender people too, and perhaps given them a little insight into the experience of being trans and some of the challenges that we face. Now, the challenges I face are systemic, with doctors, insurance companies, and men. I've had men attracted to me for the past, well, at least couple years, and I've learned a lot about men. I've learned that I was never anything like them, the men that I've met. I know there's got to be a nice one out there somewhere, but I've yet to meet him. I kind of keep hoping, but, you know, I'm not going to cling to that. I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to make that my goal or focus or anything. It would just be nice, you know, to have a nice life partner, you know. But, yeah, it's been a real challenge dealing with men. I've gotten catcalled. I've gotten disrespected. I've gotten abused. Thankfully not physically yet. Yeah. So, and I'm not really one for bars. I mean, I still have a degree of trepidation with regards to bars. Generally, inebriated people are not healthy to be around. Both my parents were horrible alcoholics. My dad became a recovering alcoholic. My mother's still an alcoholic, so I have a lot of experience in that area. So, yeah, I'm still kind of scared of that. I've gone to bars a couple of times, once alone, and I heard stuff, you know, and this was a biker bar. I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah, you might not want to do that alone. I guess I'm kind of just like that. Take chances. You know, and if you're a young person, don't rush into anything in terms of, if you're going to be intimate, be responsible. Get tested and insist that your partner get tested too. So we can stop the spread of all these fucking viruses. STDs and whatnot. So, the thing I wanted to leave you with was when you come out and you live out, you are doing it in part, large part, for yourself. But there's an added benefit. That benefit being that you can help others. You can help the conversation. By your very existence, as a trans person, or if you're a cis person, by being an ally and supporting trans people, coming to the aid of trans people whom are being bullied or attacked. I hate to say this, but like ripples in a pond, your actions can positively affect others. So you can make, through your actions, positive actions, you can make that world where that kid can come out and transition and it's not a problem. There's no bald dipshits on the internet who vomit bigotry at the mere notion of a child determining their own sense of self. But it takes all of us. Your coming out can, like those ripples, cause effect after effect after effect. You can make that world. Not only can you help yourself by alleviating some of your mental and emotional stress and distress, but you can make that world where transitioning is no longer seen as controversial. You're doing it for the generations of people to come. And by being an ally, and by standing up to bigotry, you too, as a cis person, can make that positive world. My existence, being out, I've seen firsthand, has done that. It's helped other people. When I was still in the closet, there was two things and two people that helped me to finally make the decision to come out, live out, and never go back. And that was two people, two trans women, who were out, living in the world. One I saw in a grocery store. She was feminine, but she had a voice like mine. She didn't have a perfect voice. She didn't have a perfect face, a perfect figure. That's the standard that I was using to stay in the closet, to limit myself. How many cis women look at other women and are jealous? Fucking lots of them. I realized that my voice and whatnot was not as great of a hindrance to me as I had suspected. And I saw that this woman, she was out, open, and she was interacting with people. They were not mistreating her. That really helped me a lot. That experience, just seeing her and seeing that moment in time. There was another woman. She worked at a sporting goods store. She was tall. She didn't have a perfect voice or figure. She was out. And obviously she had the job. Her coworkers seemingly respected her. The people that went there respected her. Again, seemingly just in the moment in time that I was there with her. And that really helped me. And I sincerely hope that my being out has helped others. as human beings, our first inclination is to put everything into boxes, to define everything. But human beings do not exist as a series of boxes to be checked. We're fluid. We change. We grow. Sometimes we regress, depending upon the person and the circumstances. Don't be afraid to be you. Don't think that you have to adhere or meet some high bar of femininity or masculinity. Don't look at stereotypes of gender. Express you. If you're a trans woman and you want to have short hair, and 90% of the other trans women out there seem to have long hair, go for short hair if you want to. I did. This is me. It's how I like it. Fuck anybody who doesn't like it. As my dad used to say, fuck 'em, who cares? And that simple statement right there alone helped me. My dad probably didn't realize it. He was the kind of person who would say that both seriously and as kind of a joke. But it helped me. It made me realize that I shouldn't put too much stock in what other people think. Certainly you want to read them. You want to read people's body language and emotion and whatnot to see if they're a potential threat. But beyond that, if they say something, tell them to fuck off. Or just flip them off. Or just say nothing. Just fucking ignore them. Because they don't fucking matter. Some of us have to deal with transphobic neighbors or transphobic landlords or bosses or whatever, and right now there are more and more support systems and groups being created by people like us to support people like us when we do encounter those situations. Those people who have a degree of authority and who mistreat us. There are people, usually conservatives, who pretend that litigation, legal action, is somehow a bad thing. But if you think about it, how can you punish a company for abusing you? You can't write a ticket, you don't have any authority to do anything. But the legal system does. That's one of the reasons why it exists. And so sometimes we must use the legal system to punish negative behavior. That's the only way things change. Whether it be governments, I worked for the government for a while, they got sued because the people working there in that local government were racist. They got sued and they lost. After that, they realized, oh, we can get sued, get fired, and get, lose lots of money. So we can't allow the racism anymore. Sorry, guys. I find bigotry of any kind abhorrent. I wish more people did, though. But it's one of the ways in which we can use the power structures of society. And I know lots of trans people, and I've known lots of them who when they're mistreated, they don't say anything, they don't take any other action. But if you don't do anything, you leave the door open for that person who abused you, or that company, or whatever, to continue to do it to other trans people. If you file a complaint, you make a big stink, the person or group or whatever who did it could get punished. And that will teach everyone else in that area that that kind of behavior is not okay. That's why, when you encounter that kind of resistance, you fight back. That's why it's good to take on bullies. Unfortunately, the human animal being what it is, the only way to deal with a bully is to stand up to them. Take it from someone who spent the majority of their lives being bullied, up to a certain point. It's hard. It takes effort. You can get some lumps and bruises. But, big picture here, it's worth it. Not just for you, because you'll feel better about yourself, that you stood up for yourself and stood up for others, but you can have a greater impact upon the world around you if you do that. And that goes for cis people too, who are allies of the trans community. You don't really help much if you stay silent. Just saying. It's kind of all up to us to make the world a better place. And you may think that you're just an individual and that what you do doesn't matter. But what you do has a great impact upon the world. Just always remember that. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching. And, yeah.